Today we're here in Cambridge. We're going to look at two very contrasting variety trials. We've got one here in Cambridge, which is a very late drilled at the end of January. And we've got another one just down the road we'll go and look at down at the cereal site down at Duxford. And you'll see a very big contrast in the different growth stages. And we'll talk a bit about yield potential, growth stages, and then we'll look at some disease. You can see here that this late drill crop is really still very backward. This is still only tillering. And when you see the contrast between this and the site that we're going to look at in a few minutes, you'll see a big difference in the growth stages and leaf emergence. So this is not even ready for its T1 spray yet, but we'll talk about leaf emergence and yield potential of this crop when we compare it with the other crop. So even though this is a late drilled crop, drilled at the end of January, there is still yellow rust in this crop. We can see yellow rust in Gleam and in Kinetic, but maybe surprisingly not in Zayat, which was a variety we saw sporadic yellow rust around last year. But again, the fact it's a late drilled crop doesn't mean that it's not susceptible to yellow rust, and so there's plenty of yellow rust in this trial. So here we are at the cereal site near Duxford in Cambridgeshire, and you can see straight away that the growth stages here is much more advanced than the one we've just seen in Cambridge. Most of the crop here is about growth stage 32, beyond the T1 stage. So some of these plants are at growth stage 37, so the flag leaves are just showing. So this is a very normal drilled October crop compared to the late January crop that we saw in Cambridge. So we'll just have a look at some of the disease levels and see what we can see. You can see here there's quite a lot of septoria down in the bottom of the crop. It's just starting to get up. It's probably up on about leaf 5, leaf 4, but clearly it's just starting to move. Much different to the very late drilled crop that we saw in Cambridge, where there was very, very little septoria. So clearly there's a lot more yellow rust here at this site as well. It was an early drilled crop, but the yellow rust is much more obvious here, as well as the crop being much more advanced. We're involved in a big European project called Rustwatch, and I'll just hand you over to Lucy James, who'll tell you a bit more about the project.
As we all know, yellow rust is an extremely important disease across the UK and across the world. And we are now at Niab as a partner within the project Rustwatch. Rustwatch is a large collaborative research project involving many research partners and across different countries. And we're working together to develop a early warning system to monitor race changes in yellow rust and other emerging diseases. We're looking to map new epidemics of yellow rust and track those race changes across all of Europe. And a UK CBVS survey feeds nicely into this research programme, and we're always interested in finding new samples coming in every season, and anything unusual will be accelerated through our UK CBVS testing system. So clearly this crop is much more advanced than the one we saw earlier, and there's more disease in this crop than we saw earlier. So the big question is, does this crop actually need more fungicide, and does it have a higher yield potential? Now, surprisingly, I would say not. Certainly the late drilled crop has got yellow rust in it, and it still needs treating, and it probably needs almost as much fungicide as this crop, even though this is a much earlier drilled crop, and you might think has a high yield potential. But curiously, a high yield potential doesn't mean the crop needs more fungicide, and I'll try and convince you why that's the case. So if you believe that high yielding crops give you a big response to fungicide, then your data set would look like this. So this chart shows you the treated yield along the bottom, so that's the yield potential of the crop, and it's plotted against the yield response of those crops to fungicides. So if the relationship was true, that's what you would see. You would see a good, strong relationship between the treated yield and the yield response to fungicides. But in fact, this is the real data. Well, this is data from 3 years, 2017, 18, 19, over 900 comparisons of varieties, seasons, sites. And what you see is there are some varieties, sites, locations that have very high yields, 15, 16 tonne crops, but they only give you about a 2 tonne response to fungicides.
And similarly, there are low yielding crops. So these are low treated yield sites, years, locations, but they're giving you a very large response to fungicide. In this case, about 6 tonne a hectare. So there isn't a relationship between the yield potential of a crop and the way it responds to fungicides. But of course, in a high yielding crop, you're using fungicides to ensure that yield potential against loss. So it's reasonable to spend more money on high yielding crops. But in low yielding crops, you can still get big responses to fungicides. So you have to make sure that you don't cut back on fungicides too much in those crops, or you'll just make sure that your low yielding crops are exactly that. I can see that you're not all convinced by that argument, but we'll revisit this when we talk about the fungicide programme later in the season.